Hey everybody, welcome to this week's video on emotional regulation and setting boundaries. And yes, I'm still getting over a sickness, that's why my voice will sound like 6 different people today. It just depends on if I cleared my voice or not before I recorded. So anyways, of course here is the slide with the information about me. It's up to you if you want to look at it. Anyways, moving on. Alright, so getting into it. What is emotional regulation? It is the ability to manage our emotions, behavior, and attention appropriately in present situations. Obviously, it's needed in all aspects of life. However, my primary focus will be how it affects us in sports. So, the importance of having emotional regulation strategies is that it helps us make intentional choices, resist temptations, act in accordance with our values and goals, and also helps us power through challenges and distractions. Obviously, there's a lot of things that can cause us to become emotionally dysregulated. First off, losing. This can result in anger or refusal to take responsibility for the loss, or even taking all the responsibility for the loss. Another trigger may be facing hard challenges or being overmatched. This could result in a lack of effort or giving up. May also be due to fatigue or pain, which could result in decreased effort, maybe some poor body language. Sometimes when we face criticism, we can lack confidence and become timid, causing our emotions to be shown more. We may also become dysregulated when there's perceived unfairness, so maybe there's a bad referee or umpire, or maybe you're not getting as much playing time, or you're not where you're wanting to be in the lineup. Another trigger can be just underperforming, can cause frustration and anger. Then lastly, just overall team conflict, bad team culture can result in a lot of emotional distress among everybody. It's not uncommon to deal with emotional distress while we're playing sports. However, it's all about how we deal with this conflict and come back from it. And emotions are just impacted by so many different variables, so I'm going to go into kind of each area and maybe why we react a certain way and how much we all impact each other. I'm going to talk about self-regulation, interpersonal emotion regulation, collective emotions, and then also expressions. Alright, so starting off with self-regulation and why we react in certain ways and what's appropriate and what's not. So I'm going to mostly be talking about different norms that we have, starting with cultural norms. So first off, MNU is pretty unique, houses a lot of international students, especially their student athletes. So athletes from different countries may react in different ways. Athletes from collectivistic cultures expressed emotions mainly in connection to others, like gratitude and respect. Specific example would be Japan. Think of Shohei Ohtani and how he's always showing respect to the head coach of the other team and things like that. And then when you compare that to more individualistic countries like the United States, who express emotions primarily in relation to themselves, so a lot of pride, it can make our emotions come out differently. And then next we have sport-specific norms. So some sports have their own social norms on how to show emotion and what is and isn't acceptable. So for example, in sports that you may be scored based on performance, you might have to keep a smile on your face even if you made a mistake, just to make sure that the judges don't know that you made a mistake. So maybe in a cheer competition, making sure that you're always smiling and expressing joy even if you internally are upset. And then it also differs based on team. Some teams have a different set of norms. So some teams might be okay with you expressing more emotions than others, and it may be difficult to go back and forth between expressing yourself and not based on your team. Then we also have our gender roles. Men are typically allowed to show more emotions while they're playing their sport. And common stereotypes, you don't see men showing a lot of emotion in other aspects of life, but they tend to show more emotion when they're playing their sport, whether that be aggression or jockiness, cockiness, things like that. You may see that a bit more in men's sports. And then as far as female sports, you tend to see a lot of following the leader and what their emotions are. It impacts the whole team, which kind of leads me into my next point, which is team rules. So leaders might often have the responsibility of regulating their teammates' emotions while also trying to maintain their own composure. And that's especially important because their emotions are more likely to spread. We also often see players of higher playing status being more emotional, and those players that usually don't get as much playing time are those calming and supporting roles. So going into interpersonal emotion regulation. So this could be teammates interacting with each other to regulate each other's emotions. So maybe somebody's playing music over the speakers before a game to try to get people's arousal levels up. This could also be an opponent taunting the other team to try to get into somebody's head. And we can also see this from coaches by utilizing some speeches before, during, or after competition to make up for the lack of self-regulation strategies among their players. So this can impact emotions, energy levels, inspiration, confidence, motivation, and focus. But why do we see a lot of interpersonal emotion regulation among athletes? So it could be for performance motives, knowing that the way the person is acting now will impact the performance of the whole team and needs to be addressed. Could also be for social, relational motives, just a rewarding social interaction and helping a friend. Could be altruistic motives for the best interest of that teammate. You know that it's going to have a consequence for them, whether that be with their mental health or maybe with the coach. And then lastly, it could be for egotistical motives, so for one's own benefit, just maybe to look better in general. And then it could also just be a combination of all of those. Next, we have collective emotions, so that includes group-based emotions, contagion, and effervescence. But collective emotions amplify individual emotional experiences, impact teams' task-related functioning, and support groups' social integration. Collective emotions can be both positive or negative, and they typically occur when individuals encounter the same environmental stimulus, such as shared stressors or leader impact, or if they're all trying to pursue or achieve collective goals. So group-based emotions are almost like that feelings on behalf of the team, and that can extend farther than just the team. It can also be the fan base, the university, and more. Then we have emotional contagion, so this can be pleasant or unpleasant, and is also often a predictor of performance. So one person may be able to start a chain reaction, and it's typically easier to become negative and stay negative than to become positive, just because of our natural negativity bias. Some athletes are very aware of emotional regulation because they know the consequences and want to prevent undesired emotional contagion among their teammates. And then lastly, we have collective effervescence, which primarily is cheers from the crowd, but it can also be from teammates on the sidelines. So this can just result in better team cohesion and overall relatedness, and it really helps with pushing everyone towards the same group goal, and it feels like everyone's behind you. And then lastly, it's important to think about our expressions, our nonverbal behaviors. So this can be used as a basis of one's own emotional response. It can also infer performance expectations. So you might be able to tell how someone's performance is going to go based off of what their body language is. It can also be used to motivate your teammates. So teammates, opponents, coaches can all display nonverbal cues that can cause a reaction from an athlete, both positive and negative. So sometimes we have ways to try to avoid this emotional distress, whether that be on purpose or not. So starting with situation selection. So this is when an athlete modifies their emotions by selecting which situation to engage in. This can help ensure the athlete remains in desired and intended situations. So this may be if a track runner decides to skip a race after they had aggravated their ankle to ensure that they don't retweak it. And then there's situation modification. So once you're dedicated to a situation, the athlete can change some aspect of it to manage their emotions. This may help with some confidence and understanding what you need to work on. So this may be like a diver changing a little bit of their dive to make sure that they can hit it and feel confident about it. And then there's attentional deployment, so an athlete can choose what aspect of the situation to focus on, and then it's also the act of being able to shift between different attentional planes at once to meet the demands of a situation. So this may be a quarterback being able to scan the defense before a play and then get ready for the snap. And then there's cognitive change, so an athlete can choose what meaning or perspective to have about any situation. Essentially, it's taking a negative thought and bringing positivity to it. So maybe if you played bad in the first half, just reminding yourself that there's still a whole nother half to play. And then lastly, there's response modulation, also known as suppression. So this is after an athlete has experienced an emotion, he or she can try to alter that emotional response for the next time. So for example, resisting the urge to toss your helmet after a strikeout. Some other things we can try to help with regulating our emotions include grounding ourselves. This is just kind of making sure we stay where we are, feel our feet on the ground, things like that. Make sure you're slowing down. This includes your thoughts, your breathing, all of the above. Name the sensations in your body, so put names to what you're feeling. So maybe like, I'm feeling anxious. My toes are tingling, things like that. Make sure you stay present, always. Then there's always positive self-talk. And then mindfulness techniques. Be aware of yourself, your surroundings, and how you're impacting others. Relaxation techniques, deep breathing, yoga, stretching. Then also physical activity. Shouldn't be a problem. Music is another good way to relax. Make sure that you're continuing to do things that you enjoy. That helps reduce stress and just improve overall well-being. Make sure that you love yourself and others. Always show gratitude and give thanks. Of course, don't forget about your social support and always lean on your people. And then lastly, professional support is always another option if you feel as though you need it. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about setting boundaries, because that's another really good way to help with our emotion regulation. So first off, boundaries are what help us in establishing our personal comfort level and defining the way we wish to be treated. So how do we know if we need to work on boundaries? First off, you find yourself frequently feeling resentful when people ask too much from you. However, you can't say no. You often find yourself agreeing to things you don't want to do simply to avoid upsetting or disappointing others, even if these things go against your morals or values. And then also, if you experience feelings of resentment because you often find yourself doing more for others than they're doing for you, even though you struggle to be clear with your wants and needs. Now I'm going to go through each of those and give an example of when we might need to build one of those boundaries in life and also in sport. So an example in life when maybe you're being asked too much from. You're asked to work the closing shift at the local froyo joint most nights, even though you are a student athlete. So this situation needs a boundary just because you're not really getting adequate sleep and it's impacting your performance both in life and sport. But next I have an example from a sport aspect when people ask too much from you. A strength coach expects you to lift extreme amounts of weight and continues to push you to your limit day in and day out. Obviously, there needs to be a boundary built here just to avoid injury and overtraining fatigue. And then as far as finding yourself agreeing to things you don't want to do to avoid upsetting others, an example of a boundary, you are put on the spot about social issues in the office and decide to agree just to avoid conflict. It's important to place a boundary here just because you'll continue to kind of feel guilty and you'll have that inner voice coming at you. And then an example of that in sport is maybe you've been taught a certain way to do a drill your whole life, and then when you get to college your coach tries to change that. This situation is a little bit harder. It may be more of a communication compromise situation, but it is important that you stay true to who you are as an athlete because you are there for a reason and your talent has gotten you there, and you shouldn't have to compromise who you are as an athlete because trying to reinvent the wheel at 18 years old is not ideal, speaking from experience. Then the last couple examples, doing more for others than they're doing for you in life, feeling like you're always there for friends when they're not around for when you need them. So this can be very damaging to your emotional well-being. You may feel isolated, lonely, could be worth a conversation with your friends. And then in sport, maybe you feel like you're carrying the team or that you care more about the outcome than others. And I'll tell you that I've had plenty of team meetings in my day about caring and making sure that it shows that you care. And I will tell you, maybe it didn't make us win games more, but it did help with team camaraderie, and I did have more fun at least. So that's a win. I never said setting boundaries was easy. There's a lot of barriers to setting boundaries, a lot of reasons that boundaries are very hard, a few reasons in particular. We may not be used to expressing our needs and limits. We might rather burden the stress than disappoint others. Maybe our sense of identity is intertwined with how much we do for others. We might feel guilty for setting boundaries. Maybe we have a lack of awareness into what our boundaries should be. And then lastly, maybe there's just a lack of understanding that boundaries are not only healthy, but essential to our well-being. However, I do have some tips that I hope will help make it a little easier for you to start setting boundaries for yourself. First off, acknowledge what you want to achieve. What's the reason behind the boundary? What's the goal? What do you want to get out of it? Acknowledge your own personal values. Make sure that your boundaries that you're setting are in line with your personal values, especially if that's why you're setting those boundaries in the first place. Also, it's important to understand that setting boundaries is different in each relationship, so it's important that you know the nature of the relationship, the level of trust, and the individual dynamics involved. So obviously, setting boundaries with your boss or your coach is different than maybe setting boundaries with your significant other or best friend. Remember to be patient with yourself. Maintaining boundaries takes practice and time. Stay respectful to those that you're creating boundaries with. It is likely that they'll have a better response when you maintain that mutual respect. Start small and establish boundaries early on. The earlier, the easier. Stay consistent, so be consistent with the boundaries and don't make exceptions. This can make it harder to stick to your boundaries. Remember that effective communication is essential, and it's important to learn to say no. Also try to avoid over-explaining and justifying yourself. The more you explain, the more the other person might think that you're making excuses. You shouldn't have to explain the way you feel if it's the way you feel. Your feelings are perfectly valid. Try to use I statements as much as you can instead of you statements. When you say you, it feels like an attack, and that can result in maybe not great communication. Also, it's okay to take time to think if you need it, especially if someone's really hurt you or maybe broken a boundary. You don't have to come up with a solution right then and there. Tell them you need to take time away to think about it. And then lastly, remember that a boundary is about managing your behavior, not changing someone else's. You can't fix anybody, no matter how hard we try. It's about what you're willing to put up with, and remember to know your worth. And as always, here are some mental health resources for you within your community and more. And of course, my references. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you come to my in-person wellness workshop because I'm lonely. This next one's a really good topic about identity and transitioning out of sports, so it's very important that you attend. Hope to see you there. Bye.